Hey everybody, it's Romania Black. So we're on episode 7 of Ace of the Diamond. It's so weird. We've already been through 6 episodes. But you know what? I've really actually liked this series. I didn't know going in what this baseball sports anime would be like. And so far, I mean, Sawamura is a pretty generic protagonist in a lot of ways. Like, he reminds me a lot of Sakuragi from Slam Dunk, especially with like the over-the-top laugh and his like boundless enthusiasm. But Sawamura also is so optimistic and has like a nice like determinism to him that you can't help but like him. You're like, oh man, like you can be over the top, but I kind of like you. But honestly, the characters I'm really fascinated by are one, Miyuki. Miyuki, the catcher. Oh my gosh, what a troll. I love him. He's so chaotic and yet still so cool. And then this new one, Furuya. Furuya, the pitcher that seems like he's going to be Sawamura's rival. He has very kind of Rukawa vibes from Slam Dunk, very much, but is so quiet and just kind of like, not aloof, but like in the last episode where he's like, I'm just gonna quit, we're good. Like, he very much has his own agenda, and that agenda is Miyuki. So I'm very, very curious to see how this dynamic between Sawamura and Furuya plays out. And then we have Haruichi, who is the pink-haired character that seems like Sawamura's like new best friend. And so I'm curious how this dynamic is going to go about now that we've had this game between the underclassmen and the upperclassmen happen. What's going to end up changing the dynamic? Because we've seen that Furuya has been appointed to play in the first string, so that's interesting. And Sawamura had a good game yesterday, or in the last episode rather. So I'm going to be interested to see where we go to from here. There's still some characters we haven't met yet in the OP or gotten the names for. So I'm hoping that we get them. I've got my notepad ready to take some notes with episodes 7, 8, and 9. But it's weird. After the end of episode 9, we'll be like, what's normally 3/4 of the way through a 12 episode season and well into a season normally, but this is a long season, so there's lots of stuff to cover. But yeah, I'm enjoying it so far. The humor is pretty on point for what I'd expect with this, but it's really good. And the characters are just dynamic enough that they make me want to keep watching and see what happens and how they all interact. And we haven't even gotten to official game yet. We're 7 episodes in and we've not got anywhere close to an official game. We've had the scrimmage and we had that showing of a game that briefly we saw, but we haven't got Sawamura in an official game. So that should be interesting when we finally maybe get to that. But in any case, I hope y'all are enjoying this reaction. It's early morning. I woke up and I was like, you know what? It's time for Ace of the Diamond. It is time to watch it. So I hope y'all enjoy this reaction. But we are going to start episode 7 called The Two Batteries. I'm guessing the two batteries, maybe that's referring to Furuya and Sawamura, perhaps? Since they were kind of our focus last episode. Or it could be characters that I don't even know. So we're going to find out here in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and let's go. Oh, buddy. These episodes were so good. Oh, man. This series is really picking up, and the introduction of Chris into all this, I really, really liked these episodes. Oh my gosh. So there's so much to talk about. I've taken more notes for these episodes than I have anything so far, which is really cool. So first of all, there's lots of things to talk about. These episodes set up a lot of things, and they're a nice turning point for our character development with Sawamura. Because Sawamura went through a lot of development, or at least the start of development these episodes, which was really, really nice to see. Because as I said, when we started out these episodes, he kind of just comes across as a very generic, stereotypical protagonist. But he does a lot of things in these episodes that I was really, really excited about. But first of all, man, a foot and mouth moment for myself, because the last series of episodes I watched, I was like, who's this other pink-haired guy? Why'd they make them both pink-haired? And I'm sure at this point, you guys we're all like, Romania, baka. Like, you didn't get that they're brothers? I did not. It totally escaped me. Because you can't see Haruichi's eyes. So, of course, I didn't know they were brothers. But yeah, so apparently Ryosuke is the other brother of Haruichi, the older brother, who's a third year, and Haruichi's a first year. So it makes sense why Haruichi's there. And then, of course, Ryosuke's like, you're not just going to step up and take my spot, so don't get any ideas. It's like, so we got some brotherly competition. And they're not really close, it doesn't look like, because they don't hang out together. You know, for being brothers, it's funny, and it's kind of refreshing, because normally, like, you think of the Mia twins, or you think of, I guess I don't know very many other siblings in sports anime, but when you think of the Mia twins or the twins in Run with the Wind, like, those brothers are always together and they're always side by side and they're like a pair. And with this, Haruichi and Ryosuke don't really interact with one another. They don't really hang out. So it's like, oh, okay, are you guys just not super close? It's kind of refreshing. It's actually like actual siblings. Because I mean, like, my brother and I we're 5 years apart, but we have very different friend circles. Our friends and us, we don't hang out together. I mean, my brother and I hang out together more now that we're older, I think. But when we were in high school, we did not hang out together at all. Like, we were never together in high school. So it's a little bit more realistic, which I really appreciate. I like this conversation because the last couple episodes I was like, oh man, Haruno could be a love interest for Sawamura. And then in this episode, Kuromochi is like, who's this Wakani girl? Who's this? Is she your girlfriend? And then he's like, no, she's just a childhood friend. He's like, give me her email. And it's like, what boys? What chads? Of course. So then in Kuromochi, I love the Kuromochi and Masuko interactions with Sawamura this episode, where Masuko just doesn't want people eating his food. And I can totally respect that. He's like, I get this one pudding cup. It's all I live for. Don't steal my food. And meanwhile, Kuromochi's like, I just want to wrestle you and figure out what's your deal, Sawamura. So there's that. We get some very interesting development with the coach in episode 7. Some really interesting things come to light. So we've been talking about how Sato is a national team, like they're a nationally ranked team, but apparently they haven't really gone to nationals in 5 years. They've gotten close, but they've not won nationals. Maybe it's that they haven't won nationals in 5 years. Maybe that's it. But either they haven't won or they haven't gone. But either way, they don't have as prestigious a reputation as they have in the past. And the guys that are there at the beginning are questioning the coach's reputation, like, well, you were nearly a pro. You could have taught anywhere, but you came back here. And the coach is like, I owed this school a debt. And there's clearly something else there. And don't spoil me, but I know that the coach has more ties to the school and this position than just, oh, I owed a debt as an alumni. There's more to it than that, but we just don't get to understand it yet. But you could tell that he's starting to get some pressure, because they're like, oh, well, your reputation's kind of on the line. And they make it sound like his job is also on the line. Like, if they don't go to nationals, it's been 5 years, they might find a different coach. And that reminds me a lot of Slam Dunk, when in that series with Tokoyami, or Toyotama, sorry. Tokoyami's a My Hero Academia character. Toyotama, in that series, the new coach for Toyotama has a lot on the line, because they need to do well and get results for him to keep his job. And it's kind of seeming like it's the same thing with this coach. And I love this coach. So I'm like, oh, I don't want him getting replaced. So there's a little behind the scenes upping the stakes. Like, this isn't just about the team and winning nationals and the prestige of the school. This guy's job's on the line. So he's, of course, not going to tell any of the other players that, or Ray that, the recruiter. But, yeah, that adds a little bit of a stake to this series. Like, okay, this coach, his job is in jeopardy if they don't do well. So that's really cool. I like the idea that they established that Sawamura is a self-taught second string player. I'm glad he's on the second string. I like that they established he's a self-taught player. He knows nothing about baseball, which we established in this episode is a problem, because he's been kind of riding on the coattails of, like, I'm a self-made man and I don't play by the rules and I don't need to know baseball or watch games. And Ray, the recruiter, this episode's like, yeah, you kind of need to watch the games and you need to pay attention, because otherwise you're not going to learn and you're going to get bypassed by everybody else that's doing the same thing. Because it seemed like such a noble thing and such a cool, heroic gesture that Sawamura wasn't going to the games. He was just going to practice instead. And the first 6 episodes, it's like, yeah, that's kind of noble. That's kind of interesting. But, you know, Haruichi points out this game, or this episode that that's not good. You need to go and pay attention and observe. And so I like that we're getting that change. That slow, Sawamura's mindset is slowly transitioning towards being a dedicated baseball player and actually wanting to learn the sport. That's really, really cool. I like the metaphor that the coach gives of whether when you're climbing a mountain versus climbing Mount Fuji, what changes? What do you change in your mindset? And so he's like, we're not just winning a game or climbing a mountain. We're aiming for nationals, which is Mount Fuji. So we need to up our game. We need to treat this seriously. And every game counts and every momentum counts. And we need to build up this momentum leading into nationals. So I like that metaphor of the mountain versus Mount Fuji. Like, what are you aiming for? And how do you need to change your demeanor to match that? That's really cool. I like that. I like that a lot. So yeah, we get introduced in this episode to Chris, to Takagawa. Oh, Chris is such an interesting character. And I like that Chris, at first, when we first meet him, he's just very deadpanned. He's just very stoic. He's very serious. He's a third year. And in episode 7, leading into episode 8, we don't get a lot about him. And so he does kind of come across as just a cold person and just that he doesn't care about Sawamura at all. And the other players saying like he went crazy when Miyuki took his place. That's not true, though. We find out that that's not true. Him and Miyuki have a very good relationship. You can tell there's some jealousy there, that Chris is envious that Miyuki is in the first string, but he doesn't bear any ill will towards Miyuki specifically. He's just mad at himself because he can't play like he wants to. Like, it's not anything directed towards Miyuki, which is interesting. And so I really like in that moment where he gets Sawamura, he's like, you pitch to me. Because he asked Sawamura, he's like, why, what kind of pitches are you doing? And Sawamura's like, just the ones down the middle, the ones that I'm good at. And he's like, you need to pay attention to your catcher. You need to pay attention to your other players. Like, you need to know about the batters. Like, he's like, you didn't ask any questions about the batters. You need to know about the other players. You need to know about the game to know how to, define your pitch. And he brings up a really good point. He's like, Furuya has his fastballs. Tamba has his maneuvers. What is your deal? What is going to set you apart? Because that line, he's like, if you don't change, yeah, you've got some natural talent, but you're just going to be Furuya's relief pitcher. You're just going to be on the bench waiting for Furuya to tire out before you get to step up to the mound. You're not going to be the ace or the lead pitcher. And it's like, ooh, truth bombs. And man, I am so glad that this episode took our protagonist and made him realize he messed up. He fuzzed up. Big time. Because in the moment, you understand why he's so frustrated at Chris. And when he tells off Chris, he's like, I don't understand. He's like, you don't you care? Like, why aren't you mad that Miyuki beat you? Like, you've given up. And that turns out to be the worst thing you could have possibly said to this guy, because we did it. We did the trope, the sports injury trope, and it's with Chris. And Chris has broken his shoulder, and he's trying to get better. And that gets interesting, too. That whole dynamic with his dad, the physical therapist, who's the former national player. So that turns out to be the worst thing you could possibly say. And Chris is such a nice person that he doesn't yell back at Sawamura. He just internalizes it, makes himself feel worse. He's like, yeah, no, just don't end up like me. And in that moment, everything makes sense. Like the training menu, why he was getting all this resistance training, all this endurance training. He's trying to make Sawamura someone that can resist injury and won't easily get injured like he did. Like, he's doing this all for Sawamura's sake. And when that all clicked, it was like, oh, he's just trying to help you not get hurt. It's like, oh my gosh. But we should talk about Miyuki, because in that, obviously Ray brings him in to yell at him, and she's like, you need to get better. And when Miyuki comes in and Sawamura starts talking all this about Chris, Miyuki has been the really cool character that's like the troll, the gremlin. He jokes a lot. He just plays everything cool, but Chris is his trigger. Like, Chris is his idol. Like, you can tell he idolizes Chris. He looks up to him like a mentor figure, his senpai. And the moment that Sawamura trash talked him, like Miyuki's demeanor just changed on a dime. Like it was like, no, I'm pissed off now. And that line is like, you ruined my good mood. It's like, oh, like you just, And it seems like by the end of episode 9, Miyuki's kind of cooled down and is like, he's probably heard about he's heard about Sawamura apologizing to him, because when he confronts Chris on the bench outside the vending machine, he's like, oh yeah, how's that going? And Chris is like, he's annoying me to death because now he won't leave me alone because he feels bad. But in that moment, like seeing Miyuki genuinely mad, that was not good. Not good at all. So yeah, so we go back to the physical training, and of course Sawamura, I'm glad that Sawamura apologized. I'm glad he took that moment to like bow down and be like, look, ultimate apology. I am so sorry. I was an ass. They didn't say it in the episode, but he's like, I was a baka. I was an asshole. I shouldn't have said that. I'm sorry. And Chris seems to accept it and develops that training with him. And Chris is not the best teacher. He's not a good teacher necessarily. He's very cryptic in his answers, but it seems like he wants Sawamura just to figure it out for himself. He's like, you just need to figure it out, okay? Just figure it out for yourself. And he's not trying to tell him what to do. But, oh my gosh. The dad adds another layer to this, right? The dad adds another layer, though, to this whole injury thing. Because on the surface, it seems like it seems like Chris is just trying to get better so that he can get back on the field and play. But the dad's adding another layer of pressure to all this. He's like, I've told you not to go to practices. You need to be getting your strength built up. He's like, who cares about high school now? You need to think about what's after high school. And it's like, And you get the impression that Chris was the first string catcher, and as soon as he got injured, that's when Miyuki got to step up and shine. And Miyuki's been doing great ever since, right? And Miyuki may keep it up and keep that position even if Chris gets better. But the fact that the dad is pressuring him, being like, you have to get better so you can compete after high school at the university, it's like, and I forget, honestly, when there were scouts, like looking at Furuya, I was like, why are there scouts? This is a university team. Like, this team is so professional that I forget it's a high school team. There are times where I forget that this is high school. I'm like, oh, we're already at a university. Like it's so hardcore and serious. And everybody's on such a good level that I forget it's a high school team. I'm like, oh yeah, this is a private high school. Forgot. And then when the one school they were facing is like, we'll show them that public schools are just as good, which, for the record, went to a public school, so totally know that feeling. But yeah, there's an edge of oof to that when the dad's like putting all this pressure on him to get better so he can do well at university. It's like, I feel like that's gonna come up, and it's just the foreshadowing this episode. The dad is pushing his agenda and his priorities on Chris, and that is gonna be problematic, I feel. And I'm wondering if they're going to touch on that. But that's so very interesting. But yeah, so that conversation between Miyuki and Chris, I really love that. I love that Miyuki looks up to Chris so much. And he was talking about Furuya and Sawamura. He's like, yeah, they're going to be difficult. They're difficult but attractive to us catchers. And the fact that when Miyuki says us catchers, and there's that look on Chris's face, and for a brief moment, Chris's eyes get that twinkle back in them. And you can tell that he's like, the fact that Miyuki's referring to him as a catcher. And he's like, you can tell these episodes, he's kind of given up on himself, and he's resigned to the fact that he's never going to catch again and be a player. But Miyuki has confidence that he will. And that's so touching. And there were parts of this episode that were starting to make me emotional with Chris's story. I was like, oh, no, don't look down on yourself like that. It's like, ugh. Speaking of twinkle in their eyes, Furuya with Miyuki. I mean, look, I compared Furuya a lot to Kageyama this episode because they're kind of like the prodigy players, and there's a little bit of communication's not Furuya's strongest point, which is very similar to Kageyama and Haikyuu, but that twinkle he gets in his eyes when Miyuki caught his ball, it was like, oh, it's love. I love that. I'm like, okay. And Sawamura getting mad. He's like, Miyuki, I want you to catch my balls. And Miyuki's like, I just can't help but be popular. I'm sorry. But honestly, Chris is the best matchup for Sawamura right now because Sawamura doesn't know himself. He's like, I don't know what my best qualities are. I don't know about the game. I don't know about this. And pairing him with Chris, who Ray says is the most knowledgeable person on the team, is only going to help Sawamura that much more. But I love Miyuki's reverence for Chris. That's like, it was such a good scene. And that line saying Sawamura's pitches are difficult but attractive. Like they make a catcher want to catch them because you don't know what to expect. It's like, that's interesting. And I wonder if that's going to come to play as Sawamura is trying to figure out what sets him apart, right? So I've got so many notes on here. Like what makes him stand out. And Sawamura's got to figure out what's his niche. What makes him a cool player? Because they foreshadowed a lot in this episode that right now Furuya's fastballs are very, very appealing to the audience watching because they're so fast and Miyuki can catch them and they throw people off guard. But Miyuki brings up a really good hint of foreshadowing that I think is going to make Sawamura come into play later. And that's the fact that Furuya is still not totally in control, and so that slight inconsistency confuses the batters where they're not quite confident to hit. But the problem is, when that team figures out Furuya's fastballs, it's going to be like Tamba. When they figure the pitcher out, then there's a problem. And so I wonder if Sawamura's deal is going to be that he is unpredictable. Is that going to be it? Is it going to be that he's an unpredictable player and that's what makes him stand out? I don't know. But there's been a lot of little foreshadowing in the thing with Chris's dad, the thing with Furuya and gaining control and the fastballs, the coach, and this whole season riding on his job. Like, there's so much foreshadowing set up in these episodes that are really, really interesting. And then, yeah, so a very cool parallel by the end of episode 9. So Sawamura has a shit game. He just has a bad game, and he's trying to figure himself out, and it's just not working, and he has a bad game. And it's so sad because it was right after him and Haruichi talked about doing so well, making this for the first string. And even Haruichi's like, dude, you're not on today. Like, I'm not enjoying playing with you today. And it's like, oh, that was so harsh. That was so cruel. But it's what Sawamura needed to hear. And it's like, oof. And I like that Chris is like, it just takes time and patience. By the end of this episode, by the end of episode 9, the concept of time is brought up. And I really love that because Chris is like, don't rush things. Like, you'll figure it out. You're a first year. You have time. You don't have to rush this. You can figure out what your strengths are and you'll develop those over the next 3 years. And when he tells, and that parallels him telling Sawamura earlier, he's like, I'll play with you in 365 days after you've done this. And Sawamura's like, you'll be gone by then. And it's like, there's that concept of time. And you contrast that with Furuya, who's getting so good so fast. And it's almost like he gets too good too fast because he has the thing with his finger, the nail breaks. And it was just after 2 innings. And the coach, you can tell the coach in this moment is thinking the same thing Miyuki. Miyuki doesn't want Furuya's chances of being scouted to be squandered. So he's like, don't let them see your finger being hurt. But also, because that also reflects on the team. Like, if the scouts think that their star pitcher is injured, then they're going to get dissuaded to come watch the game because they're going to think they're going to lose. And the scouts aren't just there for Furuya. They're there for the other third years as well. So there's that. But the coach is like, look, you're a first year. You have time. You can get better. You have 3 years to practice and pitch. You're going to bench for 2 weeks because I don't want you pitching and overdoing yourself. And it's almost like episode 7 and 8 foreshadowed this moment because Miyuki kept saying, he's like, you need to stop. You need to rest. And Furuya's like, oh, just a couple more pitches, just a little bit more. And Chris was saying, rest is important. You need to you don't need to overwork yourself. It's like the whole episode 7 and 8 was foreshadowing what was going to happen in episode 9 with Furuya, that he overworked himself. And the coach knows with Chris what happens when one of your really good players gets benched and they overwork themselves and they end up being unable to play. And he doesn't want that to happen to Furuya because right now Tamba's their only really good pitcher. They need Furuya to have a good season. So he doesn't want Furuya to overdo it and ruin their chances early on, right? So I love that. I love that line from Miyuki, first of all, where he says that we've got a first year with too much time on their hands and a third year running out of time and on edge. And Tamba and Chris are good contrasts, are good foils, because they're both third years. And Tamba believes he's running out of time. He's like, this is my third year. I want to pitch as much as I can. I'm always ready, captain. I'm always ready, coach. Let me do this and prove myself. And so Tamba's on one end of the spectrum. And then you have Chris on the opposite end of the spectrum, where Chris is like, his father's telling him, who cares about high school? You're focusing on something totally different. Forget this. This isn't even important. And Chris has kind of given up almost that he's even going to get to play his third year. So it's like he's kind of resigned himself to the fact that he's just going to get through the motions, do the physical therapy, and then move on. So it's two totally contrasting characters. And it's a nice parallel to Furuya and Sawamura, because Furuya has been gaining momentum and getting good so quickly that he needs to stop, take a breather so he doesn't overdo himself and ruin his first year. And Sawamura is trying to figure himself out, so he's in a hurry to get to the mound to pitch, but he has to slow down and take his time. Otherwise, like today in this episode, in today's game, he just totally flubs. So I love that scene at the end where they kind of have a bonding moment. And I like that Furuya tries to do the, isn't the moon nice tonight? Like as a conversation, like an icebreaker. And Sawamura's like, you can't even see the moon. But I like that you can clearly tell Furuya is trying to communicate with Sawamura and be like, hey, you had a shitty day. So did I. We kind of have that in common. And he's trying to communicate with Sawamura. And it's cool to see these two characters that have so far been built up as rivals, to see them kind of come together in this moment and say like, hey, we both had shitty days and got taken out off the mound. So I know how you feel. And they kind of had that moment of connection with one another, which was really cool. And in the end, they end up each of them take a tire and start running. And that's so fun. I love that. So they both got benched. And I'm guessing next episode we'll see, like, does Furuya's nail heal? Is Sawamura going to figure out what his deal is so he can get back in the game? Because they need 2 more people on the roster. The OP shows that Haruichi and Sawamura get on that roster to make the 20 players. The question is, how do they do it? Like Haruichi, it makes sense. He's got good skills. I see how he gets on the bench to be the next player. But the question is, what does Sawamura do to get in that 20th spot? That is the question. So lots of things to think about. Lots of things to think about in terms of the coach, to think about in terms of Chris. I feel so bad for Chris. I want Chris to be able to play again. But things to think about Sawamura, Furuya, lots of foreshadowing I feel in these episodes. And I'm really curious to see how it's going to end up paying off over the course of this season. So that's really cool. But I hope y'all enjoyed this reaction. These episodes have been my favorites so far. I really like Chris's character, and I'm really excited to see what happens. But I'm curious to know your thoughts down below. Please, no spoilers. But yeah, next week we'll start with episode 10 and go from there. In the meantime, I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and I'll talk to y'all again soon with more Ace of the Diamond. Bye.